YouTube, how's it going? The Goat House is back. In our most recent video, I gave you 10 NFL trade candidates to watch for as we approach the 2021 season. This video, I got 10 more trade candidates. Some more high-profile names, bigger names here. Definitely a possibility. Teams are calling about these guys. Maybe a little more has to go down for the trade to actually happen, though. But I'm excited to break it down. Again, check out that recent video. Similar rankings, predictions on the channel. In-season, weekly picks, score predictions, power rankings, a lot more. Join us, like, subscribe, follow that Twitter. Very important. A lot of updates on the NFL in there. Constantly talking during live games. Check it out. There's a link down below. Here's the Twitter. Yep, some updates. Vikings making roster moves. A lot of teams making roster moves. Packers with a surprising cut. We're breaking it all down, so check it out. Again, link down below. First one here. Cowboys linebacker situation is very interesting. Now, this video includes, again, some bigger names, high-profile names in the last video. These guys, I'm not counting on the guys in this video to get traded, but teams will call. There will be discussions and some of these guys in this video may get traded, JAYLON Smith, big-time linebacker from the Cowboys, disappointing year last year. It's looking like Micah Parsons and Keanu Neal are the guys kind of getting the big reps right now, whether it's practice or preseason, practice or the preseason games. That could be just because they're saving these guys like JAYLON Smith, LEIGHTON, VANDER, or Dan Quinn could be gearing towards the younger group there. So it is interesting to think about. Value for JAYLON Smith's pretty tough. Last year he played pretty poorly. Before that, he kind of felt like a potential all-pro player. We'll call him a Pro Bowl player caliber, we'll say. So teams, that believe they can kind of get him back to balling, may value him pretty high. Third, fourth round pick around that range. Some teams I think could be interested. The tricky part with JAYLON Smith is Cowboys been playing him an inside linebacker. I kind of like him as a 4-3 outside, but he can move around a bit. I look at the Ravens, who would play him inside. They just lost LJ Fort for the season, unfortunately, with an injury in that last preseason game. They're starting Patrick Queen. They could have a guy like Malik Harrison step up as well. They could look elsewhere, not to give up too much value. The Vikings, Anthony Barr, a new injury for him. He had a different injury last year. It's not looking good for him, and they let Eric Wilson walk to kind of keep Anthony Barr. So a little messy there. They do have Eric Kendricks and Nick Vigil and some young guys stepping up in preseason, but maybe a team to look for. What may not be appealing to them is JAYLON Smith's cap hits, cap charges in the future. The Jets, Jared Davis goes down, should only miss about 6 weeks. They could look to add somebody. The Broncos don't necessarily need somebody in there. They got a lot of cap space. He could kind of go big or go home in that category. Someone to pair with A.J. Johnson. And the Chargers may view themselves as set there, but very high in cap space. Somebody to pair with Kenneth Murray. They do like Tranquil. Cap charge would be $7.2 million. So if any of these teams trade for JAYLON Smith, $7.2 million. That's not too pricey. He's got some pretty large cap hits going forward into the future years here. But he was very recently a very solid player, and he's still, maybe has some upside. So we'll see. It's tricky to figure out who would like him, where they like him. So it's interesting to see if the Cowboys would be willing to move on from not both, but maybe one of these linebackers because they like Micah Parsons, they like Keanu Neal. They're definitely not going to trade both. It may be considered as unlikely to trade either because Parsons is just a rookie. Neal has the injury concern, and the safety changed the linebacker. But you would think teams may be thinking, one of these guys may be available. LEIGHTON VANDER has some injury concern, and does he fit what they're trying to do? I think around the same range, third-round pick. Why you could argue VANDER has more value than JAYLON Smith, cheaper. Cap charge wise, and younger. Why he could have less value than JAYLON Smith. Injury concern, and you have to give him a new deal after this year. So it kind of offsets there where I think they're in the same range and value. I think a longer list of teams that would be interested because he's only a $2.095 million cap charge. Look at the Jets again. Look at the Ravens. Could use him on the inside. The Broncos. Some of the similar teams. The Packers could afford him, could play him inside. The Saints could grab him, pair him with Mario Davis. They do have Quan Alexander, some injury concern, but they could use the group of 3 there. The Chiefs, Bengals could afford him, kind of fits their plan in terms of growing the young players. And the Rams could use another body on the inside. If there's a weak spot in their defense, would probably be the inside linebacker position. VANDER is a guy that's kind of played weak side for the Cowboys, but I think could play inside as well. Very little cap charge. Again, I think some things have to happen for a deal to happen with these 2 guys, but it's interesting because the Cowboys are kind of gearing towards a couple different guys potentially starting. They could start, guys like this that can stop the run and then play majority of snaps. Remember, it's a passing league. Parsons, Keanu Neal, guys like that. So that's definitely something I'm very curious about. Definitely intriguing what the Cowboys got going. Another linebacker, Jordan Hicks. The Cardinals kind of surprisingly drafted Zaven Collins, and Jordan Hicks was their starter last year, and now he's kind of just a key backup. And there was reports way earlier in the offseason that when they reworked his deal that he could be traded. Nothing kind of happened, but now we're at that time of the year where teams, maybe not desperate, some teams could be desperate, some teams definitely interested in adding or needing a linebacker with players going down. So I think his value kind of goes up a little bit, less of a cap charge than he once was, so $3 million. So that's a little more appealing. Again, this one, Jordan Hicks is less, not as big of a name as Jalen Smith, Leighton Vander Esch. I think it's possible that Hicks could be traded. I look out for the Ravens. Here, the Ravens could, they could just roll up Malik Harrison, but they value that position so highly. I'd watch out for the Ravens, Jordan Hicks. That's actually something that is very possible goes down there. Only $3 million cap charge, 5th round pick. Could the Cardinals not even starting him possibly because they're using the 2 young guys in there. Could the value go down even further? But I definitely look out for the Ravens. I mentioned the Vikings, Anthony Barr injury going on there. Could they use him? Could they move him from inside to an outside linebacker position? I think it's very possible if you move to a 4-3. If we're talking 4-3 defense, the Jets, the Chargers, the Packers, some similar teams that could use a linebacker in there. Could the Packers completely revamp that inside linebacker group? They added Devondre Campbell. Could they add Jordan Hicks now? I do think they like Chris Barnes there, but we'll see. This one's definitely more realistic. Definitely a guy to look out for here. Another Cardinals guy, I don't think Chandler Jones gets traded. We didn't mention him in the last video when he's considered a trade candidate, so I kind of put him in here. He's unhappy about his contract, wants contract extension. I just don't see it happening. I don't think the Cardinals want to trade Chandler Jones. I think the other problem is no one's going to trade a first-round pick because he had that injury and he's aging, but he's still very good. Where the Cardinals, for them to trade him, they may not even trade him for a first-round pick. I put the value around a second-round pick plus. Quite a few things there with it. Really, teams that would be interested, Jets, Chargers, Chiefs, and Dolphins, but I really highlight the Jets and the Chargers could afford him. I think would be interested if he was available for the right price for them. But again, $15.5 million cap charge on top of everything. This one's unlikely to happen. It's just kind of something I just want to talk about here. People want to mention Chandler Jones. I think it's very, very unlikely. Moving on to somebody else, though, we got Dee Ford. There was some talks earlier in the offseason that maybe he's a guy that could be dealt. He can't stay healthy for the 49ers. They're pretty deep in terms of their pass rush room there. They're pretty damn deep. Tricky to figure out the value because Dee Ford is very talented. In terms of his talent, I actually think he's underrated. Because he can do so many different things. You can drop in coverage if you want him. He can rush with you see on the picture, hand to dirt, and then, kind of standing up like an outside linebacker as well. So I think he's very talented, just has that injury concern. The Jets are in the market for a pass rusher. I put the Ravens. The Ravens added Justin Houston. They drafted Odafe Away, brought back Bowser. They could get better at the position. I just see it's a big-time fit here, in my opinion, because he fits that 3-4 outside linebacker as a pass rusher, and he can drop in coverage, which the Ravens love to do. So I saw the big-time fit. The Chargers could use somebody opposite of Joey Bosa, perhaps, have a lot of cap space. And the Falcons definitely need somebody opposite of Dante Fowler Jr. He kind of fits their new defense under Dean Pease there. Cap charge is only going to be $4 million, so that's pretty appealing. Here's the tricky part. Why the 49ers may trade him, they loaded up with a number of guys, in terms of pass rushers, so they could afford to trade him. And as that injury concern, I've been hearing good things. They're confident about him coming back from injury. They're confident about that pass rush, that defensive line in general, getting back to playing like the Super Bowl year. Dee Ford's part of that, so they very much, may want him part of that. Plus, I don't know if teams would offer the third if he has that injury concern. So it's hard to match up the value. So I think at the end of the day, the 49ers probably keep him, but there was some thought that he could be dealt, and they do have a pretty damn deep group there. But interesting, the Jets have Robert Saleh, who is the coordinator from the defense coordinator from the 49ers, who kind of put this defense together with Dee Ford. Now he's the head coach of the Jets, so that's interesting as well. So I guess the team to look out for there. Very interesting. I think most likely he stays with the 49ers. We will see, though. Next, another pass rusher. This one could be a little more realistic, compared to the other ones. The other ones I think are realistic, but I think a lot has to go down. Preston Smith, more realistic. Maybe one more for the last video we did. There was some talk about potentially him being a trade candidate way earlier in the offseason. They redo his deal, much cheaper cap charge. They made him very tradable. At the same time, Rashawn Gary's not a sure thing. Preston Smith played so well 2 years ago. The Packers do kind of want Preston Smith in there, perhaps. But I think if they get the right value, look at a third-round pick, I think it's possible. He's a very talented pass rusher. A little underwhelming season last year. Very talented. Team's desperate for one of the most important positions in football right now. So his value kind of goes up to that third, but I could see a fourth. But also that cap charge being very cheap helps the value as well. I think a long list of teams here. I think he's been playing 3-4 outside linebacker as an edge rusher, but I think he could play defensive end in a 4-3. The Jets. We're going to bring the Jets up a lot here. The Falcons, again, desperately need another pass rusher. He fits. The Chargers would love him opposite of Joey Bosa. The Bengals lost Joseph Asai. I think Preston Smith can fit. You look at the Chiefs, could use somebody opposite of Frank Clark, but again, Frank Clark could be suspended a bit, possibly. We'll see. Look at the Seahawks, could use another guy, and the Colts. I think the first majority of teams before the Seahawks and the Colts are more likely, but those are some wild card teams in there that could use him very cheap. Teams will call about Preston Smith. They will call about him. I can guarantee that. If it's it's less than it's like a 5th round pick is the offer, the Packers we'd rather keep him. We definitely rather keep him, start him, even if we play Gary majority of the reps. We'd definitely rather keep him. 4th round pick. Intriguing debate on what happens. 3rd round pick, the Packers probably take the deal, and I would be considering that. If you look at a team, Chiefs and Chargers would definitely consider a third, in my opinion, because those are teams that can seriously compete if they add another edge rusher, in my opinion. So definitely an intriguing not prospect, but potential trade candidate here that I think is very realistic here. Another one, maybe a little more out there because the Raiders still believe in CLELIN FERRELL. He's a very solid run stopper. He's just been extremely underwhelming for where he was picked and how he's been able to get to the quarterback, which hasn't been much, Figure out the value stuff, and why I think this deal probably doesn't go down ultimately is because the value. The Raiders still believe in him. They would I don't know if they would accept the 4th round pick. I think that's probably the highest other teams would go because he's been underwhelming in terms of pass rush. If you're getting a pass rusher, he needs to be able to get to a quarterback. He does have upside, though. I think that the Raiders would probably be looking at a 2nd or a 3rd. I don't know if a team would offer that. So that's where it's kind of tough, but they do have Max Crosby. They have Yannick Ngakoue. They have Solomon Thomas who can move around a bit. They got a number of guys in there, too. They draft Malcolm Kuntz. So, they could afford to move on from somebody. I think Crosby with Ngakoue should be their starters, are their best duo there. So, that makes it interesting. Teams looking for a pass rusher, teams that have the space, which isn't that much, 4.345. Some similar teams that we talked about. Threw in a couple teams. The Lions are kind of working towards a rebuild. The Saints could afford him. They could look to add him, and maybe they move on from Davenport in the future, and they have Ferrell competing with Turner in there. It's a possibility. I think those first teams are probably the more likely there, but it's definitely a wild card player here for sure. Robert Quinn, who the Bears signed to big money just a year ago, was a little underwhelming. A lot of underwhelming for the Bears. And the Bears, it's interesting because the Bears they just signed him a year ago. Same coaching staff for the most part and same front office, obviously. They may still believe in him. They may not want to trade him. They may believe in him, but you look at the cap space they can shed now and in the future with him. They're trying to save more money to gear towards offensive side of things to build around Justin Fields. So that could be pretty damn appealing to them to shed that cap space. But then they're very thin at the position opposite of Khalil Mack. They're thin in general. It's kind of just Khalil Mack out there. If Robert Quinn is gone. So that'd be the tough part. And that's why the value is tough, but he comes with an 11.6 million cap charge and has some big cap charges in the future. You know, he played very, very well with the Cowboys just 2 seasons ago, so some teams could be interested. Some of the similar teams we talked about that could be interested in pass rushers, that would be okay with maybe the cap charge here and you know, viewing him as a fit, because he definitely does not fit everyone. You know, there's some doubt that he even fits his current team here. So, it's definitely an interesting one, because the Bears would have to be okay with moving on from him. You could argue they won't be, because they believe in him still. They want that other starting pass rusher opposite Khalil Mack that they won't have if they move on from him, unless they make another move. Or, you know, it would probably be a great thing to shed that cap space. You know, so you could argue they want to, because they want to gear towards offense. You know, and maybe they can extend Akeem Hicks, and that's okay to spend a little bit on defense if you move on from Robert Quinn. You know, so you kind of can argue both sides from the Bears, and then you question the other team, do they want to take in that cap charge? Are they comfortable with him? Because he's been up and down his entire career. So it's definitely an interesting one here. Nick Foles, maybe a little more possible than a guy like Robert Quinn, that a trade happens, because he's currently a quarterback 3. You would think he should be a quarterback 2 somewhere. There are some teams that, really could use a quarterback right now, actually, a key backup. You know, so it's pretty interesting, and that's why maybe his value, before you would think, 7th-round pick, maybe a swap of picks. But there's some teams that actually could get desperate for a backup quarterback, so possibly a 6th-round pick, cap charge $4 million. The Falcons need a backup quarterback. Do they go with this, do they go a little smaller maybe? Because A.J. McCarron did tear his ACL, so adding somebody behind Matt Ryan here. Like Nick Foles' possibility. The Jets could use a backup perhaps behind Zach Wilson. There was some talk earlier in the offseason the Jets could look for Nick Foles. I think the Cowboys need a backup pretty bad. Dak with his injuries, which is going to be good to go, but with his injury concern, I guess, and the backup situation being pretty brutal. You know, last year they had Andy Dalton. That's a pretty good backup. Now he's with the Bears. We'll just swap him, add Nick Foles here. That could be appealing to the Cowboys. The Bengals, I think, need a backup pretty badly. And you throw the Colts in there, I think less likely than the other teams, but familiarity with Frank Reich and, some injury concern with Carson Wentz, even though he's already back. So I think it's a little less likely than the other teams. I'd really look out for the Falcons here. The Falcons, the Cowboys kind of made sense. The Bengals, these teams make sense. So Nick Foles is a guy that is one of kind of like Jordan Hicks. We talked about Jordan Hicks, very realistic on this video that they chances are they could be traded actually. So I'd watch out for Nick Foles. Another one that I wouldn't count on happening, but it becomes interesting. Is Drew Lock here, because there is an intense quarterback battle in Denver between Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater. Most of training camp here, it's probably Lock. And then as the preseason starts, I thought Lock looked really good against Minnesota a week ago. But ever since the game started in the camp, the practices in between the games, and the last game against Seattle that just happened, was that yesterday or 2 days ago, Bridgewater's kind of taken over. So I'm hearing Bridgewater's kind of leading the way now, and they should announce that soon. So we'll see. It's a pretty interesting battle. So if they make Bridgewater the starter, let me make this clear. They're not going to be, we got to trade Lock, let's go out there and call teams. They're not going to do that, because it was a battle for a reason. Bridgewater's not a sure thing. It's very good to have this key backup, but teams will call. I guarantee that. Teams will call, and the question is, do the Broncos accept the deal that is the right price? And figuring out the price is that tough part. But I throw in some teams. The Vikings actually looking for a backup quarterback. Kellen Mond, a little bit of a project, for them long term. And Browning's was looking good in training camp, but looking pretty terrible in preseason. So they're looking for a backup there. But knock on wood, Kirk Cousins has been pretty healthy, obviously. So will they value that? But there was actually some reports around draft time, actually after the first day. The Vikings made a call about Drew Lock to see his availability. He wasn't really available at that time. Remember, the Broncos passed on taking a quarterback in the first round. We heard the Vikings were looking at the first-round quarterbacks, that being Fields and company there. So that's pretty interesting. You kind of put it together. The Vikings showed interest in Lock in the past. We think, I'm confident that was the truth, and now they're looking for a backup quarterback. Very interesting. The Steelers, I think Lock would be a heck of an option for them for the future. Put him behind. And they got a list of quarterbacks. I don't believe in any of those. I feel like those guys are 2s or 3s for their career. Put Lock behind Roethlisberger for a year. I would really like that. I would really like that. So Steelers are interested. They're missing some draft picks though. You know, they were missing their 4 or 5 trade. They're 6 for Schobert, so that makes it tough. The Falcons, yeah, they got Matt Ryan, but it's interesting because they are looking for a backup. You stash him behind Matt Ryan for a little bit, couple years at least here. It's a possibility. Saints a little more of a wild card because they have Jameis Winston, they have Taysom Hill, and they have Ian Book now. But Locke added the quarterback competition, which he could actually win that. They wouldn't start in week 1 if they trade him for him now, but he could ultimately be their best guy and be the guy of the future. That makes sense to me. And the Colts, yeah, much deeper. I would love Locke on the Colts, but much deeper of a wild card here. I don't know if they actually do it. I think it would just make sense to me. You know, so it's interesting. Cap charge would be pretty cheap. You probably have to extend him, though. That's kind of the tricky part. The value is the tricky part, too, because I put his value around a 4th-round pick. If somebody trades a 3rd, I don't think there's really anything wrong with that. I just don't know if anybody offers it. But, the problem is the Broncos may not accept the 4th. They may not accept the 3rd. You know, I actually don't think they accept the 4th. So that's what makes it tricky. Maybe it's a little harder to see this happen. Because it's gonna be teams calling them, but they may, you know, if they trade Drew Lock, Bridgewater ends up struggling, or you know, if he gets hurt, because remember he had that gruesome injury, it was quite a few years ago, and they're like, well, snap, you know, we had a guy, now we don't have the guy, so pretty tough there. But if they get, you know, maybe they even get a 2nd-round offer and they have to accept, they feel like they have to accept that, so interesting. And then maybe Drew Lock's named the starter because I think first preseason game in the camp before that. I think he looked like the guy, you know, now it's Bridgewater. So Locke might be named a starter. I don't know if anybody goes out of the way to trade for Bridgewater, you know, so it's going to be an interesting few days or next week for the Broncos here because this is a pretty crazy battle here. So really excited to see what happens, but that's going to do it for this video. You guys can let me know your thoughts in the comments. We're talking on Twitter, constantly updates. Again, we have a recent video at 10 more trade candidates that they're a little more realistic to happen, along with some from this video that I mentioned. You know, so again, check out those other videos. A lot more to come. Cannot wait for our in-season content. Like, subscribe, turn notifications on so you don't miss any of it. Follow our Twitter link down below. It's going to do it. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.